Thank you, Miriam. Thank you, everyone, for coming. Can everyone hear me okay in the back? Yeah. A little louder? Yeah? Cool. So I just want to kick it off with a quick question. You can just think about this. I sent this to a few people ahead of time. And the question is, what do these people have in common? Hopefully you can see the screen okay? Kind of, sort of? Not so much? That's Barack Obama, Angela Merkel, Mark Zuckerberg, Paulo Coelho, Rihanna, Elon Musk. Any guesses? Any hands?
Famous.
They're famous. Any more? Successful? Human. That's a pretty good one. Not sure about, I think she might be a robot. I'm not sure. Any other guesses? Sorry? They're very productive. That's a good one.
They're tall.
They're tall. I'm not sure if some of them are very tall. You're tall. Okay, I'm going to switch it up a little bit. What about these people? What do they have in common? See a few of the same ones and a few perhaps familiar faces, maybe some of these people in the room.
They're handsome.
The guy in the top left is?
They're brilliant.
They're brilliant. Thank you, Jackie. Thank you for being here. Any other guesses? They're creative, sorry?
Smiling, maybe?
They're smiling. Yeah, Sam's looking a little serious, kind of smiling.
That's a smile for Sam.
That's a Sam smile. No, the thing that all these people have in common, and in fact all of us have in common, is that we all have 24 hours in the day. It sounds super obvious, but in a way it's also kind of profound because we have all these things that we want to accomplish. We have all these things on our to-do list, and indeed, some of those people, like the ones that we looked at, all the people that we looked at have used that time to accomplish great things. Whether that's becoming president, in the case of Elon Musk, trying to make humanity a multi-planetary species, kind of a loftier goal, or just writing a great book, being a great parent. All these things people manage to accomplish, and they have the same 24 hours that we do. And yet, I can speak for myself and say that even though I have the same amount of time in my day as Elon Musk has in his, or Barack Obama, or Angela Merkel, or Pablo Picasso had in his, it always feels like there isn't enough time, like there's too much I still want to do and I can't fit it in. Does anyone else feel like that? That there's stuff you want to accomplish and you don't have enough time for? Kind of everybody? Cool. So this talk is for you, and I'd like to introduce just a simple definition of productivity. This is not a dictionary official, just to me, productivity, the purpose of productivity is simply to make the most of your time. That's it, just to make the most of your time. The problem I find then is that most of the time when you talk about productivity and when you hear people talking about productivity or if you read about it, it's productivity like this, and I'm sure this is hard to read, and that's kind of the point. This is a graph of Toyota talking about factory productivity. And most productivity fits into this, how can we get 10% more cars produced a year, or use 8% less energy, or 5% less man hours. And for most of us here, does anyone here work in a factory? No hands? Does anyone like smash rocks together for a living? Not so much? Exactly. So it isn't really useful for us. Just squeezing out 10% more or doing, with 5% less energy input isn't the kind of productivity we need. So what we're going to talk about instead is what I call productivity for creatives. So because we don't work in factories, we fit into kind of a different category. So when I hear the term creatives, what I'm calling all of us collectively, the first thing that comes to mind is maybe a writer. Do we have any writers here? A few writers, artists, yeah, graphic designers, more hands, bloggers kind of fit in the category of writers, people in the fashion industry, anyone who does anything kind of visual, creative. Maybe you can see this desk here, kind of flowers. You tend to think like this sort of, that side of the brain, very artistic. And that's true. Those people are all creatives, and we've got quite a few of them here. But creatives are also programmers, marketers, and I know we have quite a few of those as well, myself included, coaches. See a few of you here are coaches. Entrepreneurs, that's a lot of us. Freelancers of some sort, people who own their own businesses. We're all people who work using our brains, right? We work in an office, we sit at a desk a lot of the time, or we're on the phone, we're thinking. We're not just doing with our hands, we're actively thinking. And the creation the things that we create is really our product. So it's not just 10% more cars off the line. There's another name that people use for that, and that's knowledge workers. Maybe you've heard that one as well. Office workers, people who think for a job. So we all fit into that category. So what I'm here to talk about is productivity for people like that, people like us. And we're going to do that in 3 parts. So we're going to talk about what is real productivity, as I call it. We're going to talk about overcoming resistance, which is kind of the main obstacle to productivity. And then we'll get into some kind of practical techniques and tools. And I asterisk that because we only have a short time today, and I'm not sure how far we'll get into that. So if there's interest, maybe we can do a follow-on workshop, as a few of the recent speakers have done. So real productivity. This is Peter Drucker. He was an Austrian philosopher, management guru, professor. He later moved to America and became quite well known. He was really ahead of his time. He coined the term knowledge workers all the way back in the 1950s. And he kind of saw that our economies, our societies are changing. We're moving from everybody being a farmer or everybody working in a factory to we work with our brains, we sit at desks, we think. And he also said something that I think is really interesting, which is efficiency is doing things right, and effectiveness is doing the right things. And I find that we spend so much of our time and energy focusing on that first part, focusing on efficiency. How can I squeeze in one more task? How can I iron the laundry while holding the baby while talking on the phone? You're just trying to get a little bit more done in the day. But that's not really life-changing. It's not going to make your whole existence better. It's just going to let you get a little bit more done. So we kind of apply that thinking to productivity. So to me, real productivity is doing the most important stuff, not just doing more stuff. So let's talk about how you can do that. First of all, when I see the important stuff, I think the first thing that comes to mind is it's all important. I've got a million things on my to-do list. I can't just drop all of them to go, write a book or whatever. It's all important. So this is kind of the first bit of resistance that comes up. So there's another term that gets used sometimes, which is deep work, doing the deep work. If it all feels important, then focus on what's deep. And before we get into what that is, let's just do another quick one of these. First guy there, if you can't see the picture, he was the founder of Apple, invented the iPhone. Does anyone know who this guy is? Any guesses? Someone want to shout it out?
Steve Jobs.
Steve Jobs, cool. We all remember him. Going back a little bit further, the guy in the middle here, he's a famous physicist, E equals MC squared, Manhattan Project. He came up with the theory of general relativity. Einstein. And lastly, maybe going back even further, a composer, had a famous requiem. Martial? Mozart. Awesome. Okay, does anyone remember this guy? He was really good at responding to emails on time, answered the phone on the first ring.
Neville.
Not true. I'm here instead of answering the phone or responding to those emails. And the thing is, we sit at our desks and we think, all this shit is important. I got to get this done. And it's answering emails. It's stuff that, yes, it's kind of important in that moment, but in the grand scheme of your life, it's not going to make a difference. So looking at that, just a kind of a quick example again, what is that deep work? So let's say you're a writer, maybe a hipster writer because you've got a typewriter, maybe a successful writer. And so your to-do list, you have, you need to answer some emails from your fans or followers, maybe hire a new agent, deposit those royalty checks, again, kind of a successful writer, service your typewriter, start writing your next book. Which one of these might be deep, important work that you should prioritize? Deposit the royalty checks? No, I heard it. Start writing the next book. And again, you sit there and you wake up in the morning and you look at this list of stuff to do and you've got all these things and then start writing next. That's kind of going to take a long time, and you do the other stuff. But this doesn't only apply to writers or artists. This applies to entrepreneurs, freelancers. Your version of deep work, my version of deep work might look like having a retreat with a co-founder, creating that VC pitch, to go out and get funding. And yeah, you've also got other stuff on your to-do list, like writing a new vacation policy for the employees or SEOing your website. But it's trying to have that focus. So to kind of summarize, prioritize work that could change your life, makes you better at your craft. And if you don't have anything that's kind of that big and lofty, big picture stuff, focus on the things that at least require your unique perspective. If you run a small company, it feels like kind of you've got to do everything. It's all on your plate. Focus on the things that need your vision, that need you to do them, that aren't just the things that are important. And if all that fails, if you're still not sure what to do, there's one kind of simple rule that I actually picked up from Scott Adams, the guy who created Dilbert. And he said, do what gives you energy. Anything that you need to do in life, anything that's on your list, whether it's working out, losing weight, teaching something, learning something, working, it's going to require you to have energy. And so do the things that give you more of that energy. Be in the relationships that give you more of that energy. Hang out with people who give you energy. Don't spend your energy on everything that you do, so at the end of the day you're just totally depleted. So now you know what you need to do. We've prioritized the type of work, so have a nice life. Except not really, because just knowing what you need to do is not enough. You sit down and you're like, okay, I'm going to write that next book. I know that's what I need to do. Or I'm going to sit down and write that great piece of music or the next big app, whatever it is, whatever your deep work, your amazing contribution to humanity. You kind of know that you need to do it, and yet you kind of start, and then there's something that holds you back. And that something, in this case, we're calling resistance. The term resistance came from a book called The War of Art by Stephen Pressfield. It's kind of a common term, but he's really credited with coining the word. And he sort of described it as if you're a painter who doesn't paint, a writer who doesn't write, you know what resistance is. And I think we've all experienced this. And again, it's not only artists, it's not only writers. You go to the gym, you're supposed to kind of work out, but you don't really, or you have some diet that you want to stick to, but you're struggling. That's resistance. That's this feeling. You already know what you're supposed to do, but you're just running into this kind of, I can't quite do it. Another version of the same topic, also from Stephen Pressfield, he said and I think this is really profound, he said there's a secret that real writers know that wannabe writers don't. It's not the writing that's hard. It's sitting down to write. Does anyone have that experience that it's like once you get started, it's kind of not so bad, but just sitting down to do it is the hard thing? For me, even in school, even with homework, it was like once I was actually doing the homework, it wasn't that bad, but the idea that I needed to like sit there and do it would just drive me nuts. So that's resistance. And again, this applies in all aspects of your life. This is Jesse Owens, very successful athlete, Olympic athlete, won gold medals. And he said, even in his life, the battles that counted weren't the ones for the gold medals. It was the struggle within himself just to start, to train, to show up every day. So how can you kind of get past that resistance? What can you do? Because it's universal and it'll affect you in all areas of your life. If you can solve it, you can do great things. One of the simplest, easiest things to do. Does everyone remember inertia? Do you remember Newton in physics class? Objects in motion stay in motion. Objects at rest tend to stay at rest. Right? It's really hard to start something like a train. It takes a lot of energy. But once it's going, it just wants to kind of keep rolling, keep going. You can use this to your advantage because psychologically, the same thing happens. Starting something is really hard, but once you've started it, it's actually kind of easy. So how do you get started? Well, one little trick that I've picked up along the way and that a lot of people use, Sam was even telling me he's done this with his coaching clients, is make it easy. Use this to your advantage. So don't tell yourself, oh, I'm going to start tomorrow and write the whole book. Say I'm going to write one page, or better yet, one sentence. Just set a goal for yourself. I'm going to write one sentence tomorrow. I'm just going to paint for 10 minutes. That's easy. I can paint for 10 minutes. I'm not even an artist. I can paint for 10 minutes. I can do one push-up, right, for exercises. If you tell me I have to work out for an hour, that resistance comes up. I'm kind of busy. I don't necessarily have an hour. That sounds pretty sweaty. But if you tell me do one push-up, yeah, I can do one push-up right now. So make it easy for yourself. Ask yourself, what would this look like if it was easy? You want to write? Write 2 sentences. That's easy. And you'll find that once you make it easier, it's easier to start. And once you start, you'll kind of tend to keep going. So easiest, step 1, make it easy to start. You'll find, though, that just writing one sentence or doing one push-up, you won't be done. You won't have written a whole book. You won't be in incredible shape. It's just a start. And this is where routine comes in. Another quote from Stephen Pressfield book, and Somerset Maugham was another author, and someone asked him, when you write, do you write only when the inspiration strikes you, or do you have some kind of a schedule? How does it work? And he said, yeah, I write when inspiration strikes. Fortunately, it strikes every morning at 9 a.m., which it seems kind of like, okay, that doesn't. What he's saying, what he's talking about is this idea of having a routine. So I was reading this book. It's called Daily Rituals, How Artists Work. And it's really interesting because most of the things that you read about these great artists, and I'm talking artists across all disciplines from philosophy, like Carl Jung, I mentioned Pablo Picasso, we'll come back to him, great writers, poets, even scientists. I read another biography of Da Vinci, and as I'm reading these patterns come out, and it's not about the work that they did and how great it was. It's actually about like the mundane details of their life. What time did they wake up? What did they eat for breakfast? Right? And I'm kind of thinking, like, can any of this genius rub off on me? And so some patterns started to stick out. And what I noticed is that some of them wake up early, some of them wake up late. This is Ernest Hemingway. He talked about waking up every morning at first light. Okay, that's definitely not me. Anyone here a morning person? Got some morning people. Does anyone like Spanish style, eat dinner at 10 p.m., go to sleep at like 2 a.m.? Yeah. So sometimes you read these things and it's like, ugh, like that's not advice that I want. But the important thing isn't, okay, so Hemingway, he wrote in the morning, right? But that's not the important part. The important part is that every morning he had a set routine. He woke up, he sat down to write. He didn't want to hear anything else. He didn't want to do anything else. He picked up from where he left off the day before, and he wrote until he knew what was going to happen next in the story. Then he put it down, walked away, went about his day, and came back the next morning and did the same thing. Hemingway's routine worked out pretty well for him. Pablo Picasso, on the other hand, completely different. Woke up whenever the fuck he wanted to, sat down at 2 p.m., locked himself in his studio in Paris, painted, didn't come out till dinner time, didn't matter who was waiting for him, came out when he was ready for dinner, and that was his day. So it doesn't have to be, Monday to Friday, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m., these exact hours. You've got to find what works for you. Work according to your schedule. The thing that stuck out at me as I read through all of these different artists' routines was that they weren't the same routine, but they all had a routine. They all had a way of doing it that worked for them. If every day you're just waiting till like, maybe the inspiration will strike later, I got this thing, you'll never get it done. And the other thing I would say that they did that was interesting to me was they kind of like embrace their weirdness. If you're a creative person, you're not necessarily going to fit into that kind of like factory model of exactly this and exactly that. And I know what I'm describing sounds a lot like program yourself, but it's okay to be weird. This is Beethoven. He had the same breakfast every day. He had coffee, and he wanted exactly 60 beans per cup. And he would sit there and count his 60 coffee beans that he would then grind and make his coffee with. So embrace your weirdness. Do what works for you. The other thing I noticed in the case of Beethoven was that he would go for walks. So he would sit down, he would do his composing, and then he would finish for the day, and he would go for a walk. And that seems pretty irrelevant, but the more I read through this book and the more I studied all these people, that also kind of stuck out as a common pattern. And it wasn't like exercise for the sake of being super healthy. There's something about just creative work and then getting out of your chair, getting up, going outside and moving that seems to be common among all these great minds. Haruki Murakami, another great artist. Anyone read his books? Any fans here? A few in the room. So he's actually really famous for this. He's a fantastic writer, a prolific writer of our generation. And he's interesting because he has sort of his regular day-to-day stuff, and then he's got his I'm writing a book routine. And when he's writing a novel, his routine is he wakes up at 4 in the morning. Definitely not me. I'm likely to be still awake, more so than just waking up. He wakes up at 4 a.m. and works for 5 to 6 hours straight. He works for 5 or 6 hours straight, and then every time he finishes, and he goes for a run or goes for a swim. So again, that pattern of like work, clear the mind with exercise. Don't just kind of sit there all day and do the same thing. And what he said that I thought was really interesting is he follows that routine every day without fail when he's on a project. And the repetition itself becomes the important thing. So it's not necessarily like, oh, you've got to work those exact hours because you'll get a certain number of pages. It's just that knowing what you're going to do and what your day is going to look like that makes the difference, that kind of defeats that resistance. So kind of summing up, work according to your own schedule. It doesn't have to be from 9 to 5. If you're a creative person, if you're working on your own thing, find the time that works best for you. If you do creative work best at night, make a schedule that allows you to work at night. And it doesn't have to be 8 hours straight. A lot of the greats, they wrote for 2-3 hours a day. 1-2 pages a day, 300 days a year is more than a full book. Again, I'm using the example of a writer, but if you're an app developer, if you're a painter, if you're an entrepreneur, these lessons still apply. As you said in the case of Beethoven, embrace your weirdness. Just do what works for you. Don't worry if it doesn't kind of work the exact same way as for everybody else. And then I think most importantly, remember that some days it's going to be easy. You'll sit down and it'll just flow. Some days it's going to be really hard. You'll feel like it's not happening. It's just you're struggling. Doesn't matter. Just show up every day. If you do, you can achieve some great things. Ingmar Bergman, famous film director, extremely successful, nominated and won a ton of Oscar awards and virtually every other award out there in his field. And he said something else that I think is really interesting as well. He said, filmmaking is 8 hours of hard work each day to get 3 minutes of film. If you think about it, it's kind of a terrible ratio, but that's what it is. It's 8 hours of hard work each day to get 3 minutes of film. And during those 8 hours, there are maybe only 10 or 12 minutes of real creativity when the magic is happening. And maybe they don't come. And that seems like incredibly depressing to me, that you would work 8 hours to try to get 3 minutes of film and like you didn't even get that kind of 10 minutes of creativity. But this is the magic part. He says, and maybe they don't come, but then you have to gear yourself for another 8 hours and pray you're going to get your good 10 minutes the next time. So that type of a formula repeated over a long period of time resulted in that success and the success of virtually any other artist you can think of. Again, across film, writing, painting, but also in business as a freelancer. One more that I like, one more person whose works I've read a lot of, and maybe you're all familiar with, Tim Ferriss as well. He's done a lot of interviews. He's written books where he's kind of taken knowledge from others. But this is actually Tim talking about himself. Something I like to keep in mind for those days when it's super frustrating. He says, I've wasted a lot of time journaling on problems when I just needed to eat breakfast sooner, do 10 push-ups, get an extra hour of sleep. Sometimes you think you have to figure out your life's purpose, but you really just need a cold shower or some macadamia nuts. And again, it's like you have these days where you feel like it's just not happening, it's not coming, and maybe you're just not taking care of yourself. Maybe it's just as simple as sleeping a bit more. And if you are that type of creative person who uses your brain for work, like don't underestimate the importance of taking care of yourself and just feeling good every day. I like to think of the baby example. Does anyone here have kids or have taken care of a kid, maybe babysat before? Yeah, a few. So when you're caring for a baby and you hear a baby crying, you kind of run through this mental checklist. You see a crying baby, you're like, is it hungry? Is it tired? Is it covered in poop? And so think about this yourself as you're going through your day. If it's not kind of feeling good, if you're frustrated, if the work isn't going well, am I hungry? Am I tired? Am I covered in poop? Take care of yourself. And if you put it all together, again, I think the secret to productivity for creative people is quite simply decide what's important, what's the deep work, what's the real thing that could change your life, prioritize that work, have a routine for getting it done, whether that's first thing in the morning or sometime in the evening. Find what works for you, make a set schedule, have a routine for getting it done, and then repeat. The final image here is a river going through a canyon. And remember that those don't happen overnight. That's the water flowing through, rubbing against the stone for thousands or millions of years that then creates those kind of beautiful things in nature. That's it for today. Before we take any questions, there are a lot of more specific kind of techniques and tools that we use for productivity that are more kind of like dealing with things like emails, to-do lists, software, things of that nature. I'd love to go over some of those. I think this isn't quite the right venue for that. If there's anyone who's interested in that, let me know. We can do maybe a workshop. Yeah, does anyone want to see kind of like to-do list type stuff, how to manage emails? Awesome. So I had that as kind of the second part of this talk, but it's not practical in this room, so maybe we can do that at Restation on a Wednesday. Yeah? Miriam, you and I can talk afterwards about that. We'll find a time. Seems like there's some interest. This is me. Thank you very much all for coming. I'm a very lonely person. Please follow me on Instagram. That's how I get my social validation and feel good about myself, or send me an email. Also, before questions, one last thing. I just want to thank Miriam for organizing everything and finding this venue at the last moment. Really appreciated our usual venue canceled. And Maria and the other folks from the co-working agencies for organizing this. This is like a completely free, awesome event that we all get to take part in. So support this group, support the co-working things. And I want to thank Margarita, my love, for encouraging me to give this talk. And she was actually the one who bought me the book that kind of got a lot of these ideas going, the How Artists Work. It's a really cool book. So thanks again, everyone. Any questions? Yes, sir.
I'd be curious about your thought on committing to other people and having some like external pressures, actually, committing to clients, committing to partners, having deadlines, because it feels like it's really geared up to people that set their own schedule, but is that a good thing? I think it has good and bad parts of it.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. So there's so much I wanted to say on this topic, and indeed there's so much to say about it. And one of the things that I would definitely like to talk more about is this idea of an accountability partner, right? So if you're not familiar with this, the idea is basically there's a part of your brain that is afraid of what other people think. It's a very natural reaction. We're social animals, right? And so just like we said, you can kind of hijack that inertia idea to work for you. You can hijack that social pressure to work for you as well. And it's not maybe for everyone, but I think most people do well with this. So the idea is, if you want to write a page a day or a book or whatever your goal is, instead of just promising yourself that you're going to do it, make that promise to someone else and have them hold you accountable. So have them call you every Friday and say, did you write this week? Or did you, whatever it was. One of the reasons why Alcoholics Anonymous is such a successful program is because of that community support. The idea of not drinking is very simple. Just don't drink, right? Like that seems kind of doable. But what makes it successful is you're in this room with all these other people and they're all saying like, oh, did you drink this week? Did you lapse? And so that social accountability is very much a proven thing, and it does work. And in fact, it's also the reason I think a lot of people have coaches. I know we have a few coaches in the room. And having a coach as someone who can hold you accountable is another great benefit of that. Thank you. Other questions? Go with us.
So can you share your routine?
Can I share my routine? Yeah, absolutely. So my routine, part of my routine is what I wanted to talk about. I'm happy to talk about it a bit now, but it's what I really want to get into in like a workshop. It's evolving, and this whole process of learning all this is as much as like I'm happy to present it, it's really like a lesson for myself. So first of all, I work with clients, and my clients are available kind of East Coast time in the US, which is 5 hours behind us here. Which is actually, being in Las Palmas is part of my routine, because it means that I tend to do better in the early hours of the day. Not that I'm a morning person, but once I have that onslaught of emails and phone calls and this website is down and this isn't working and I need you to fix this today, like my creative part of my brain is done. I'm now in like fireman, put out the fires, just get it done. What's next? Oh my God, I've had 4 coffees. Like that's me midway through the workday. So what I find works best for me is to write or do anything creative or just sort of like in a calm kind of fashion, including meditation, earlier in the day. So what I like is I wake up. I'll go in detail. Breakfast, I think, is something I think a lot about. And if you read that book and if you listen to Tim Ferriss's podcast, he talks a lot about morning routine and all that. So it works for me. Wake up. I have coffee, dark chocolate, and 90% dark chocolate, and a handful of walnuts. That's breakfast. Here, I either go for Spanish class some days a week, or I work out, and that's a run and body weight stuff. And then I have creative time. That's kind of I've worked off sort of the morning kind of jitters. I've gotten some exercise. I've gotten a little coffee in me. Then is my time when I can write, I can think, I can do whatever. And then after that is client work. Sometimes I try doing the creative part, the writing or whatever, in the evenings. I've gotten a little bit better recently. But as I said, it's tough. And other people are the opposite. Some people, they wake up in the morning and they have no clear head and they'd rather just work a normal day and then in the evenings do the creative stuff. Yeah? Other questions? Yes?
So, with all the factor productivity, that doesn't mean not give up, but maybe let go and focus. Because that's also difficult once you get used to a routine to be productive. How do you manage to realize that that's not working?
It's a good question. I mean, I think having a successful result is a little bit different than productivity. For a lot of us who are doing creative work, success is very difficult to define, and indeed I think that's one of the challenges. The easy things to measure are like, how many emails did I send today? How many phone calls did I do? How many cars did Toyota produce? But those aren't usually, I mean, for Toyota that's great, but if you don't work in a factory, again, those aren't necessarily the things that are success, right? So if you're an author and you wrote, 3 or 4 not so great books, and then all of a sudden you wrote that really great one, it's not like, oh, I wrote 5 books, so 5 is what counts. It's like, I wrote that really great one, or I painted that one masterpiece. So I tend to focus more on, like, are you practicing your craft? I think if you care about something and you're passionate about it and you keep working on it and you give yourself the time to work on it, you will get better over time, no matter what that thing is, whether it's, again, art or app development or being an entrepreneur. I mean, if you look at successful startup founders, we think of them as like these, like, oh yeah, this guy's so great, he started this company and it's super successful, and we kind of ignore the fact that they started 4 or 5 before that maybe didn't go so well. And I think it's that process of trying, failing, trying again. So that's different. I mean, that's important, but a little bit different than productivity. Where productivity comes in, to me, is like giving yourself the opportunity to try those things and not just getting stuck in the day-to-day kind of stuff. Sure. Other questions? Cool.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.